Objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise tonight and I want to tell everybody about one of my former interns in the Kentucky State Senate, Henry Berg Brousseau. Henry was truly one of my favorite interns, one of those guys who was bright, who was curious, who had a smile that could light up the room. In Kentucky, in the state Senate, the Capitol Annex sits right behind the Capitol, and we'd make that walk across to the state capitol just as we make the walk across here in Washington, D.C. from the House office buildings. And Henry was incessant, constantly peppering me with questions, asking me things. What are the policies we can do? What are the fights we can have? How do we make progress? How do we get things done in the seat of government? Henry was brilliant. He was kind, ambitious, and really funny. And most importantly, Henry was a fighter. He had to be. Despite having two loving parents, a wonderful family, Henry's life wasn't easy. He was severely bullied as a kid, and he battled with the trauma and the depression that went with it. And it wasn't coming just from the kids either. Adults from all walks of life bullied and berated him incessantly until the end. Unfortunately, that end came way too soon. Last December, on December 16th, Henry died by suicide. He dedicated his life, his young life, to helping people like him. His work, his legacy, it will continue to benefit youth all across this country. And I can't help but think how much he would have given to this world if he had just been allowed the chance to exist and exist in peace. Henry's mom, Karen, recently joined the president and the first lady on the south lawn of the White House to celebrate Pride. That's not where she wanted to be. You never stop being a parent. She wants to be with her son. Henry's story is truly tragic, but unfortunately it is not unique. We can all agree that what I just described is a tragedy. It is a tragedy to lose a young person, a tragedy to lose someone with so much potential, a tragedy for any parent to have to bury their baby. And yet, for some, when I tell you that Henry was trans, that tragedy goes away. His humanity is erased. Henry is erased. I can't accept that. We can't bring Henry back, but we can continue his fight to end the suffering that he and way, way, way too many others have endured by people who refuse to acknowledge the humanity of trans people and try to criminalize their very existence. More than 80% of transgender people have struggled with suicidal ideation, and nearly half have attempted suicide. The Trevor Project estimates that one LGBTQ plus child attempts suicide every 45 seconds in the United States. Every 45 seconds. Every 45 seconds, a child tries to kill themselves. A child. And what has our response to this tragedy been? In the first 6 months of Congress, House Republicans have passed legislation that actually makes it worse, that further harms LGBTQ plus kids. From the so-called Parents' Bill of Rights, which unfairly targets our most vulnerable youth, to the national bans that deny decision-making abilities of doctors, coaches, and parents. We've tried to complicate these issues here, so I want to make it really clear and really simple. Stop being mean to kids. Our children are not pieces in a political game. These anti-LGBTQ plus bills have real life consequences. And so instead of legislating with the kindness and the compassion that our kids need, House Republicans' legislative priorities have been overreaching, callous, and cruel. We're not alone in that blame. Unfortunately, Congress isn't the only institution passing these heinous, heartbreaking, and harmful laws. State legislators across the country are following suit and are trying to legislate LGBTQ youth out of existence. In my home state in Kentucky, Republicans in the General Assembly made things worse and overrode the governor's veto of one of the most oppressive anti-trans laws in the nation at the 11th hour. Senate Bill 150 in Kentucky tramples the rights of children and parents with exclusionary bathroom policies. It overrules the judgment of teachers by barring the discussion of gender identity or sexual orientation, and it barricades doctors from their patients by banning gender-affirming care, often life-saving care. It's cruel, and it's not without consequence. It is hurting people across the Commonwealth of Kentucky and across our country right now. I find it especially ironic that these overreaching policies come from the party of small government. Last week, we kicked off the beginning of Pride Month. The impetus for Pride goes back to Stonewall, when the LGBTQ+ community transformed the fight for equality in the United States. Pride Month is meant to be a joyous celebration of free expression, of equality, of inclusion, and of resiliency. In just the time that I've been in public office, we've made huge strides, both big and small, at every level. We've cemented marriage rights for everyone. In Kentucky, 24 cities have a fairness ordinance. Nationwide, 21 states have restricted conversion therapy. 38 states allow trans people to update their name and gender identity on their driver's license, and 27 states allow the same for birth certificates. Alongside members of the LGBTQ+ community and advocates, we've worked hard to move the needle towards a more loving, accepting, and inclusive world. What has been accomplished is important, but there's still so much to do. There's still so much more to fight for. We're fighting for safety. We're fighting for equality, for freedom. We just recently marked the 7th anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, where 49 people were killed just for being themselves. Madam Speaker, on days like today, when we talk about these issues, when it should be a celebration, I still can't help but think about some of the heartbreak. Today, I can't help but thinking about Henry. I think about the world that he was fighting for, a more compassionate, understanding, caring place for everyone. These extremist Republican attacks against LGBTQ people are wrong. They're unacceptable. They're inhumane. And let me be perfectly clear. The words and acts coming from our colleagues are not harmless. They are not small. They are hurting innocent people. They are hurting children. If we don't take a stand, if we don't take a stand and change how we legislate, then we will see more kids like Henry. Bright, energetic, enthusiastic, kind, caring, compassionate people who will struggle, who, despite the love from friends and family, will see no way out as these attacks become too painful to bear. Here in this chamber, in this body, in life, our job is to fight for people. Our job is to fight for people on the margins. Our job is to fight for people like Henry. To fight to protect everyone's rights. Shouldn't matter who you are. Shouldn't matter who you love or where you come from. Everyone deserves to be treated equally. Madam Speaker, I now yield to my colleague, the the gentlewoman for Vermont, for some remarks.
Madam Speaker, I just want to start by giving a heartfelt thank you to my colleague, Morgan McGarvey, a dear friend whose family has become close to my family. Our wives have become close. And it just means so much to me to be standing here on the floor of the House, a place where I never thought I would be in a million years. Not just because I'm a child of an immigrant and a working class mom, but because I am a gay American. And I knew at 11 that I was gay. And I also knew that it was not something that was accepted by my family or community or my teachers or friends, but it didn't matter. That's who I was. And I also knew that my calling in life was to alleviate suffering. First as a teacher, I taught middle school for many years, then as a state legislator, and now in Congress. That has been the through line of my life, is using whatever position of power I have to alleviate suffering in all its forms. And I just want to tell you what it's like when you know at 17 what you are called to do and you do not see a path to do it. Not only because I had nobody in my family would ever run for office, but because as a gay American, I knew the world had not changed enough for me to be able to run safely for office. And even when I decided to run, it terrified my parents. They did not want me to be so public about being not just gay, but having a family, a wife, and children. To open our lives up to the world, to say this is what a family can look like. And not just survive, but to thrive. And for the first few months when I was elected to be a state senator, my dad would start almost every single phone conversation with some version of, have they vandalized your house yet? Have they slashed your tires yet? Are you getting a lot of hatred? And I'd say, Dad, if I am getting that, I'm not going to tell you because I don't want you to be worried. And even today, I have to remind them constantly, don't read the comments. Do not read the comments on social media about me, because you will not see me reflected in those comments. And you will feel so heartbroken that your daughter, who is finally doing what she was always called to do, is going to be on the receiving end of hate. And for what? For standing up for marginalized people in my community. And sometimes that is members of the LGBTQ community. And sometimes that is the rural poor in my community that need me to stand up for them, or people of color who are being discriminated against, or just regular families that can't put food on the table or pay for affordable housing. That I would be a target for doing the work of an elected official, not because I'm doing my job poorly, but simply because of who I am. And I will tell you who I am. I am a very proud American citizen who contributes deeply to her community and her state and her nation, and that will never matter to some people. All they will see is that I am a gay American, and therefore I am suspect, not to be trusted. And I have to tell you, this is the greatest honor of my life, to be here in Congress. Never thought that I would get here. But it sickens me to my core when I sit in committee hearings or I listen to discussion on the floor and people say things about me in my community that are not just rooted in ignorance, but often in hatred and distrust and fear. It doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. In your communities, regardless of your congressional district, you have gay Americans, trans Americans. They may be in your families and they don't feel comfortable telling you because they know how you feel, because they see your votes, because they hear what you say about us on C-SPAN. Morgan just gave voice to something that is at the heart of it for me and my constituents, which is, where is your love? Where is your compassion? I've had the opportunity to talk to 2 different sets of parents of trans kids who have come to the Capitol to say, our own government is talking about our children as if they are demons, as if they are monsters. They are dehumanizing our children, and they're blaming us, the parents, saying we are terrible people because we love our children and we support our children and we want them to get the care that they need and they deserve. And they said in both these meetings, we need you to speak for us, because we are not in those rooms, we are not in those halls when people are saying not just insensitive things, but cruel things, uneducated things about our lives. We have people in our community, in the LGBTQ community, who are thinking of leaving their home states right now because they fear for their lives and for the lives of their children. It is not hyperbole. Yesterday, I was at a leadership meeting for some young people who had won a wonderful award. I went to speak to them. And afterwards, one of the moms came up to me. She gave me a hug and she said, "You don't know what it means to my kid to see you here as an open gay woman serving in the House of Representatives. I am fearful for her, not because," she said, "not because I don't love her and support her, because I do." She said, "but I fear because of the hatred that she receives on a daily basis." And she said, not just from the community, but from elected officials. And as Morgan said, these are children. Almost every week, I have families come to visit me in Vermont. And some are parents of trans kids, some are parents of gay kids, and some are just parents of kids who want to be part of something powerful like elected government. And I can't tell you how proud I am every time they say to me, "I am so glad that I voted for you. I am so glad that you are sticking up for all of our kids." Because they say that gives me hope for the future, that we're going to ride out this backlash. And what we see right now is what we saw when I was a kid. And instead of being on the receiving end, instead of it being about trans kids, it was about gay kids. And we were the boogeyman. And every time I hear some of our elected officials on TV talk about how they are protecting families by passing legislation like Don't Say Gay, which is absurd, because these kids in Gen Z are so far ahead of us. And what they see are people and not labels. But I think about my own family. If we were not in Vermont, if we were in Florida or in Texas and somewhere else where people are passing these ridiculous bills about Don't Say Gay, my own children will be in school being ashamed or being made to feel ashamed of their family. This is about real people. This isn't about some slogan Shouldn't be about playing to your base so that you can raise more money or drive people to the polls because you want to make them fearful of Americans who are just living their lives. That's all they want. That's all I ever wanted. Now it's Pride Month. And we threw a big party in Vermont last week for Pride. And one of the young men who helped me organize it, the day before this event, his car was completely and totally trashed and vandalized and had hateful, homophobic messages all over it. And I was so frustrated and sad that this was how we were ushering in Pride. But even more than that, I hated that I could sit with him and say, I have had the same experience. I had to have my car repainted because someone decided to scratch Dyke into the side of my car. So I was grateful that I could sit with him, and I thought, have we learned nothing? And just the other day in Vermont, a poet was harassed at a poetry reading because he is a man of color and he is gay, and they basically chased him out of a poetry reading because somehow his poetry was going to be so dangerous for the people of that town. We're talking about ideas. Why are we policing ideas? We've seen this before. So I'm here today because I want you to know that Pride is about going through the hard stuff too. It's about not glossing it over with rainbow flags and parades and drag queen story hours and the things that are celebratory. Yes, they are. But it's also about acknowledging that some people are trying to drag us back. They are trying to erase our experience and our identities and our families. And I could not be more proud to not just represent my community, but also all of the Vermonters who support me, who elected me, who said, yes, yes. We see the work that you do. We see the compassion that you bring to your work. And it doesn't matter to us that you are a gay American. You are the right person for the job. And that is what I need from my colleagues here, to understand that this is about real people, it's about real family, it's about promise and possibility, and every single kid believing that they have the rights and opportunities every other kid. And that families feel like, regardless of what their family looks like, that the government is not going to come after them and infringe on their personal freedoms. Pride is a month about freedom, about living your life true to yourself, and have a heart wide open to the world and inviting other people in to celebrate. We should have enough room in our hearts. We should make enough room in our hearts. We should be driven by compassion and love and empathy and basic human dignity. That is why I'm standing up today. Representative Morgan McGarvey, I love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I can't I can't do better than the Congresswoman from Vermont, Congresswoman Becca Balint, who is not just an extraordinary person with incredible intellect, with incredible ability, with one of the biggest hearts I've ever seen. But as you've heard tonight, she's also so brave and so courageous. Do not let the little frame fool you. She's who you want in your foxhole. And I think her story shines a spotlight on something that is true in Vermont. It's true in Kentucky. And it's true across this country. That despite the incredible steps and strides we've taken and made, there is still so much left to do. Congresswoman Balint, I know you've been called to public service. I know you, not just in Vermont, have alleviated people's suffering. You are going to do it here, and you're going to do it for every kid in the country. But thank you also for showing the way. There are kids in this country tonight who see your speech and your example and know it's possible for them too. Which is good. It's not good, it's great. It's a great thing. Because look at what we're talking about here. We're talking about kindness and compassion, empathy, caring, inclusiveness, equality. Equality. And when we don't talk about those things, it is the opposite. It is hatred. It's division. It's inequality. I know in my state in Kentucky, 24 cities have passed a fairness ordinance. What's a fairness ordinance? It simply means you can't be discriminated against in your housing, your employment, or your accommodations. That's the fancy way of saying you get to live where you want to live, you get to work where you want to work, you get to eat where you want to eat. But we couldn't pass it on a statewide level in the Kentucky General Assembly. What does that tell people? It says, in fact, they want to allow that discrimination. Why? Why? And then think about the real and practical implications that has. I talked about Henry, my intern, so full of promise, so full of life. Died by suicide on December 16th. It was a Friday. His mom called me, and as I was sitting in a coffee shop meeting with somebody, I went over to her house that night and gave her a hug. I knew Henry before I ever knew his mom, but his mom served with me in the state Senate, was my colleague. And we hugged, and she sobbed because she just lost her son. Not a statistic, not a number, not a trans kid. Her son, her baby, her Henry. Her colleagues all reached out and expressed sympathy, and then turned around and passed a truly awful, overreaching, and heinous bill that targets youth in the state of Kentucky. But an interesting person came to testify, one of our former colleagues, a Republican state rep who just retired, and also had learned that one of his grandchildren is trans. He admitted he didn't know how to handle it at first. But you know how you handle your kids or your grandkids? With love. And so he testified that he's worried his kids and his grandchild will have to leave the state of Kentucky where he served as a conservative lawmaker because of the overreaching effects of legislation like they passed in Kentucky and like we have talked about passing and have in fact passed on the floor of this House. If you don't know how to deal with these situations in your own family and you decide the best way to deal with them is love, isn't that the best way to deal with it for every kid and every family in this country? Madam Speaker, my colleagues and I have made it very clear tonight that we will not stand for these extremist attacks against the LGBTQ community. That we will not let the majority threaten to legislate LGBTQ people out of existence and let them know that their harmful extremist bills have real-life consequences. We must and we will do everything in our power to support our LGBTQ plus community. We will show understanding over ignorance, kindness over callousness, and inclusivity over exclusion. We will save lives. We will work toward that more perfect union. I yield back the balance of my time.